narcissistic systems see people as objects, not whole humans. And we've sort of been alluding to this, the whole time. But, you're only allowed to have needs and be a human if it doesn't interfere with the system.
Hello, and welcome to How to Be a Terrible Daughter, the podcast where we hate your parents for you. We joke about our horrible childhoods and we talk about how we survived them, and we share the tools that we've learned along the way. Who are we? I am Elizabeth. I am a psychotherapist and an artist, and I'm not alone.
You're not alone. I'm not just a voice in your head. I am Megan. I am an occupational therapist and an energy healer and a medical intuitive. And we are cousins. Yeah. We grew up together in Los Angeles. We both had crazy narcissistic mothers. So we watched each other grow up and get abused. Fun times.
Woohoo!
Yeah. We're actually going to hate your parents a little bit less this episode and hate the systems that are oppressing you a little bit more. We still hate your parents. Don't get us wrong. Like, we actively hate them. They're terrible people. But we're just not going to talk specifically about them. We're going to do a topic that we've been bandying about for a while now and sort of trying to figure out how to do, because it's something that, I don't know about you, but I've noticed it for a while, but it's getting worse lately. And it's systemic narcissism. So it's how narcissistic patterns show up in sort of societal, cultural, political, economic systems. And we are in an age where there's been a great rise in the amount of narcissism in our systems that we're living in. And we are all collectively being abused. And I think a lot of people don't realize it. But I think for us terrible children, we do, because it feels so horrible. I mean, I had to get out of an entire country because it felt so bad for me to be in the US. And so we wanted to dive into this because if you are a terrible child and you are feeling particularly, like you're just having a really hard time in today's society, there's reasons for that. There's parallels. There's deep, deep parallels to what happened to you when you were a kid. This is going to have to be a multi-part episode because there's a lot to dive into here. It's a really, really meaty topic and it covers a lot of different areas. And there's a lot of these different systems that we want to talk about. So because of that, we're going to do this as a multi-part episode, and we're going to change up the format a little bit. We're going to not do the crazy mom off at the end. We're just going to keep talking about systemic narcissism until we're done.
Because unlike our other episodes, which are light and fluffy and the audio version of a beach read, this one is tough.
This one is tough. This is what is tough. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about what we mean about systemic narcissism. So systemic narcissism is what happens when the patterns of narcissistic abuse, with which you will be familiar, are embedded into social, economic, or cultural systems and then just normalized as this is just the way it is. Very much how when we were kids, we didn't realize that it wasn't normal. I mean, I think we had some ideas, but if that's all you've ever known, you just think it's normal, right? And this is happening at a much larger level than just family systems. I was trying to brainstorm. I wrote a list. Feel free to add on if there's anything that anywhere else I missed. But I was trying to brainstorm some of the systems where I've been seeing this happen more and more. So the big one is late stage capitalism is a huge one. White supremacy, that's been going on for a long time. Patriarchy, ableism, diet culture, the way that the U.S. prison system is. I can really only speak to the U.S. prison system because I don't know much about systems in other countries. And then even schooling and academia. I mean, I worked as an occupational therapist in public schools, and there's absolutely aspects of narcissistic patterning in how we structure our schools and how we expect students to comport themselves in schools. So, and are there any that I missed? Are there any that you want to like pop in here and talk about more? I mean, we can go into more detail about them, but
yeah, I think high control religions, definitely. I think that I think
high control political parties too, I would say.
Yes. Fascism. Nationalism. We don't necessarily have sexuality and gender here in a very particular way. I mean, patriarchy kind of is a multitude of evils. I would also say, which is connected to ableism, but aging.
Yeah. I think that's also connected to capitalism, though, right? Because you can't be a good capitalist cog. I mean, that's the other thing, too, as I was like thinking about this and writing notes for this episode, I realized how much these systems are. The Venn diagram of all of these systems is overlapping, right? There's just so much that applies to more than one system or that affects you, in one system versus the other.
I was very lucky in that in my early 20s, I heard this term, which is that all forms of oppression are linked. And so if anyone is being oppressed anywhere, essentially we're all being oppressed. And I don't mean that in a victim way, but that we all actually have a responsibility as well to prevent that from happening. And I think one of the really difficult things about this is that when we are put in these systems, right, that are narcissistic, it makes it very difficult to self-reflect and to even have a sense about what we are missing, let alone create that thing that we are missing. And so, like, fundamentally being treated like a human being and with dignity and with care is missing in these systems, but it's in such a way that we are so used to these things that we don't really even think about it anymore.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we're going to break down in this episode is how these systems do that. And it's things that I'm hoping a lot of people who are listening will be like, oh my God, I knew that was happening. I just never thought of it in terms of a narcissistic framework. But it definitely is. So something that these systems all have in common, and again, if you grew up in a narcissistic family, this will sound familiar. So they demand constant extraction, meaning they always need something from you. They require hierarchy to function. They cannot tolerate accountability, so there's no actual repair or apology. They externalize harm, so it's never the fault of, whatever the system is, right? And they punish people who name reality. So if anyone calls out the system and says like, hey, the US prison system is completely fucked. Like, this is not a way to deal with crime or rehabilitate people. You get called a, liberal something. I don't know.
Right. So like you criminalize poverty and then you blame criminals for, you know what I mean? You make poverty illegal and then you basically believe that criminals have no rights and you punish them terribly and all of that stuff.
Yes. And then, that overlaps with white supremacy because if we look at like the number of Black people in prison and minorities in prison, like per capita, it's so different than what the general population is in this horrific way. Like, again, they all overlap. Everything overlaps. It's all terrible. This is such a cheery episode.
You know what? I was thinking yesterday about what you had said about anger being the fundamental drive, like that's the thing that creates growth and change. And that one of the things that is part of a narcissistic system, no matter what size, is that your life force is curtailed, right? And so literally, like if you are mistreated and abused, your natural reaction is to defend yourself and be angry and whatever. And then they punish that as well. And so it becomes this smaller and smaller feedback loop where you cannot fight
you're definitely not allowed to access anger in any of these. I mean, if you're an angry woman, you get called, a bitch or hysterical. There's the stereotype of the angry Black man or the angry Black woman. You're not allowed to have access to anger, right? If you're disabled and you get angry, you get called ungrateful for what you do have. You know what I mean? We have ADA, right? You should be grateful that we have these laws. So,
but we fought for that for decades and decades and decades, right?
So what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of the topics that we've covered on this podcast before, that we've covered in terms of what it looks like in a family system. And we're going to look at what it looks like now in these narcissistic systems, how it scales up into these systems.
I want to say something just because I just want to name my relative privilege. And therefore, there are things that I don't understand. And there are things that I am blind to. What I say is not the definitive statement about these things. So I am white. I have education. I am in a straight presenting relationship. I'm educated and all these things. So I just wanted to be honest about that, and that I know that there are things that I don't know.
Yeah. So we are both middle-aged white women, and who grew up relatively wealthy in Los Angeles, which is a big city. And so we both have attempted to do work to sort of decolonize our brains, for sure. It's still a work in progress. I mean, the thing about entitlement is you don't even realize you have it, right? Again, it feels like, isn't this just normal? But it's normal if you have the privilege, right? So,
the privileged can afford to be ignorant. And the other thing is that it's also a way to keep these systems of oppression going, right? Which is if, for example, if you talk to men, men have almost never seen or very rarely seen sexual assaults or sexual harassment. Men know to do that when other people in power, men, are not present, right? And so it's the same for all of the privileges that we have. There isn't accountability because we don't have to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're going to start with the golden child and scapegoat roles, which we just talked about a couple episodes ago. And we know that in families, the golden child is rewarded for compliance and for image management, right? They're the children that everything gets projected onto them about how the narcissist wants to be seen, right? And so the golden child is the one who's responsible for keeping up that image and all of that. The scapegoat is the person who's blamed for all the dysfunction. They're punished for telling the truth. They're the angry ones, or the ones that are, the bad children or whatever, the disobedient ones. And in these systems, the golden children are sort of the bootstrap success stories, right? The model minorities, or the exceptional women, the woman who became the CEO of the tech company, or, all of that. And it's held up to show as proof that oh, see, the system works. If you just work hard enough and follow the rules and do everything you're supposed to do, anybody can succeed, right? But we all know that's bullshit. We all know that's complete bullshit. And we know that anybody who has achieved any success, who is a woman or a minority or disabled, or, has worked 10 times as hard and has had to overcome so much more adversity, and so much more, micro and macro aggressions to get where they are, and just swallow those, right? Just swallow them down and keep going, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's a lot of what the golden child does, right? The golden child swallows down their own needs, right? They just try to be the perfect, again, projection of whatever the narcissist wants, right? The smartest, the prettiest, the richest, the whatever, right? And then that's proof, see, our family was fantastic. Look at this amazing child we produced, right? It's sort of the same thing.
And they treat you well enough that you get sucked in. And so it's much harder to question the whole system when you are treated well enough, you kind of get enough, goodies.
Yeah.
Right. And so in some ways it's easier when you're the scapegoat because you already gotten a peek behind the curtain and you're like, this is fucking bullshit. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, poor people, disabled people, fat people, traumatized people, they all become the scapegoats, neurodiverse people. If you are unable to be this beautiful, perfect, quote unquote, golden person that the, system wants, then you're the scapegoat, right? And you get blamed for that, right? You get blamed for being fat or being poor or, like that's, oh, well, you should have tried harder, right? Look at the golden child. Look at how well they're doing. And they're also a, marginalized person, right? So it's this cycle where it's set up that the golden children are there so that the system can say, these narcissistic systems can say, see, if you just work hard enough, you can be successful. Look at all these people who did it, right? And the scapegoat exists to absorb the blame, right? So that the system could just keep going the way it is and have an enemy to blame, right? Have someone to blame. It's the poor people's fault. It's the immigrants' fault. It's the, blah, blah, blah. It's the gay agenda, right? There's an enemy to blame so that the system can prop itself up.
And it's a way to split and keep groups of people alienated from each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And because if we actually all worked together, we actually might be able to upend the system or change the system. Right?
Yep. Yeah.
But if we're taught to be afraid of or look down on or look up to, right, certain people or certain groups, then we can't communicate and we can't come together.
And the golden children they also always implicitly know that they are the tiny amount, like the scraps of attention that they get, which again are not even genuine. It's just in front of other people, like your parents bragging about you, right? Or the company putting you as like, look at this, woman we have at the C-suite level or whatever, right? So whatever the golden child is, they know that they're just one step away from being the scapegoat, like one misstep or one angry outburst or one whatever, right? And so there's also this sort of, there's this way that the golden children do start vilifying the scapegoats because it's like, I don't want that. At least I get the fancy chair in the C-suite. So, yeah.
Well, and also, I mean, I think one way you can talk about it on a larger scale is like the respectability politics, right? Which is like you have a group of people who, I mean, I will just say like, you have sort of like white gay men who have achieved a certain amount of financial and political power, disassociating themselves from trans people of color because they're not respectable. And it's the same thing that happened in the women's movement, right? Women of color who were like the people who really created and moved the women's movement, including the suffragette. The white women were like, no, you'll get your things later, but we're just, and they were put aside.
Yeah. And that's very much what happens, again, in narcissistic families as well, is the people who are abused end up becoming the abusers, right? Because it's just, that's the system you're in, and you think that's the only way it's going to work. And you know that if you stand up to the system, you get punished, right? Yeah.
One of the things that I think about with my kid and their friends, right, is that, I try and not get in the way of their idealism because I did feel that way when I was their age. And I have more cynicism or more sadness about the things that haven't been done in my lifetime that I had hoped for. But I don't want me to be part of the system just by, questioning their ability to change things. So it's just something I'm thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. So, interesting to think about whether you are a golden child or a scapegoat in these systems and what that means for how you have been, not thinking about some groups of people or not challenging the system or thinking sort of like, well, it could be worse, but if I keep doing what I'm doing, I'm going to be at least okay, right? Like these are all sort of things that happen in these systems or ways of thinking in these systems that I think could be good for us all to sort of examine a little bit.
Who benefits and who gets hurt?
Who benefits and who gets hurt? Yeah. And how am I unconsciously hurting other members of our human family by the fact that I am taking the benefits that I can get, you know? Okay, the next thing we wanted to talk about that we've talked about in family systems before is the black and white thinking that the narcissist does. So you are either the best thing that's ever happened or you're a horrible, awful child who is making their life hell, right? And there's no in between. There's no room for, I love you and I don't like this thing that you did, right? There's no room for that in a narcissist's mind. You either are a good person or for some reason that they can't understand, you flipped on them and now you're a horrible, mean person, right? There's no room for sort of a spectrum of human experience and a spectrum of emotions in a relationship. It's either all good or all bad, right?
Even there isn't complexity of thought or understanding, right? So it's one thing or another. You're this or you're that. And that's not how things are, you know?
That's not how things are. And I think this one I feel like is so deeply embedded into capitalist culture that I have a hard time seeing it sometimes. I find myself falling into these traps a lot of sort of this either or thinking. So some examples of how this shows up in the systems that we're talking about are you're either productive or lazy, right? There's no in between. There's no flow of your energy. You're not allowed to have it normalized that some days you're productive in one way and, you know, other days you're productive in a different way and some days you just can't do shit. You know, like that's okay. That's how humans are, you know, but we have this system that's telling us we have to be productive every day. And if we're not productive every day, then we're lazy, right? So it doesn't even matter if like 4 out of the 5 days you got stuff done or you got stuff done in the morning and then didn't in the afternoon. It's like, oh, I wasted those hours this afternoon. I could have gotten so much more done, right? And
for whom and for what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I say something kind of dumb?
Sure. It probably won't be dumb, but go ahead.
You believe in me. So biologically and ecologically, the work that we are made to do is to breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. And we're supposed to eat food and drink water and then expel the waste. And that is literally, those are our functions and our job in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And so literally just living, we have a purpose and we are part of the whole and we're part of the whole cycle. But that's not something that we're ever told about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Now I'm thinking about something like pooping productivity. I did my part today. I pooped. So another one is desirable versus undesirable. I think especially as people who were raised as girls and women in Los Angeles, you and I got this pretty heavy duty. So there's like a very narrow, you know, definition or way that you can be desirable, right? And if you're not exactly that way, if you have the perfect body and the perfect hair and the perfect blah, 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 but you have bad teeth, oh, now you're undesirable, right? Like you should get those fixed, right? And like, you know, it's this black or white thinking that if you have any faults at all, well, now you're undesirable, right? Now you have something that needs to be fixed, right?
And the system is designed to criticize and to create these hierarchies and to basically exclude and exclude and exclude. When I think about desirable versus undesirable, I really think about literally the capitalist concept of supply and demand, right? That the rare is what is desirable. And if you are wanted, you are desirable.
Mm-hmm.
And that has nothing to do with real worth. And in capitalism, it also doesn't have anything to do with quality either, right? At this point, a lot of it's about marketing or extraction or whatever. But again, people are not objects.
Right.
We are living beings.
Right.
Right.
Right. And we all have personal experiences, if we really tap into it, that it doesn't take very long to realize that these are complete bullshit. I have absolutely found some people incredibly hot and desirable who did not at all fit the mold of what we're supposed to think of as desirable, right? And I'm sure everyone has had that experience, right? But part of what narcissism does is that you start to believe that other people are allowed allowances for this kind of thing, but you're not, right? And that's what happens over time when you're in these systems or in these families. You talked a little bit about, capitalism and sort of the being wanted and this rare thing. And that sort of gets into the next one we were going to talk about, which is respectable versus disposable. So certain people get to have respect. And I'm thinking powerful white male CEOs, we think of them as rare, oh, not everyone could build a tech company from scratch, right? We think of that as this rare thing, right? But then everyone else is disposable, right? So people who are doing the coding, well, anyone can go learn how to code, so they are the disposable people, right? So these systems of who gets to be, and again, this sort of goes back to the golden child scapegoat thing a little bit too, right? Who gets to be the golden child? Who gets to be the mirror of what the system is wanting to hold up, right? And who is disposable? Who is just an object that can be replaced?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I can't cite the exact research, but I did read that white men tend to be in the top positions in corporations and stuff like that, literally not because of their abilities or intelligence or experience. There are psychological and sociological experiments that show that people admire and trust white men more.
Yeah.
And that's actually completely unfounded.
Yeah. In fact, the opposite is true if you look at success rates of people in various professions, from rates of successful surgery outcomes to, rates of various, I can't even think of other ones, but consistently it's not the white men who are doing the best at these things. So not only is it unfounded, it's oftentimes not even true, right?
Except for violence, domestic violence, mass shootings.
They're quite good at that.
Sorry, I had a bitter moment there.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's this. So, yes, again, and this all comes back to this idea that in narcissistic systems, people are playing roles and we start to believe those roles, even when the evidence points to other things, right? Because as we've talked about in other episodes, a lot of times it's just easier to play your role than to buck the system because there's so much pushback and so much potential for abuse when you buck the system, right? So it's easier just to stay in the role you've been assigned, head down, and I'm just going to do this, right?
Can I say one more thing about disposable?
Yes.
I think that this is a really difficult because there's so many systems where we are taught that our worth is conditional, right? That we're constantly earning our worth. And that could be either through being a good person or being productive or compliant or whatever. But this idea that we could lose our dignity or we could lose our value at all is really problematic. I think about in religious traditions, you could lose your soul.
Mm-hmm.
Even the concept, right? Or original sin, right? You're born with sin. How is that real, right? And this idea that, that it is so easy for you to suddenly become worthless, right? And easy to discard is incredibly profound. And as a therapist, I've seen that kind of a thing do so much damage, but it also doesn't have to be in just religious settings. Like if you look at like the prison system, many people who are in the prison system are absolutely considered disposable.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Well, it's this thing of like, once you cross the line from respectable to disposable, it's so hard to cross the line back the other way in terms of how the system sees you, right? Not in terms of how you are as a human being. And so that's part of how the system keeps itself in place, is people are going to continue to be dancing as fast as they can to stay respectable, right? Because the moral and practical and logistical punishment for becoming a disposable person or becoming an unwanted person, right? So, I mean, I think there's even layers of it. There's disposable, like, you're just an object and I can replace you with someone else. And then there's the vilified, right?
Yes.
And we both know what happened when our moms vilified people. Oh my God, right? Like, you saw growing up what that looked like. And I don't know about you, but I would do whatever I needed to do not to get in that role.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that that is also true in these systems, right? I mean, the amount of effort that people put into, you know, not needing financial assistance, right? Not needing help at work, not needing, right? Like, to being as close to the perfect object as you can be in whatever the setting is, right? Yeah. Because you know what happens when you become not just disposable, but the undesirable, right? Narcissistic rage, when you're undesirable, you end up in prison, or you end up homeless, or you end up, right? Because there's no help there once you've crossed that line. Yeah.
So what would it be like if you had a job where, if you had a sick day, or if you got sick, or if someone in your family needed help and you needed to be out from work, what if that wasn't a fireable offense? What if that was something that no one would be surprised by, because you treat each other as human beings and you know each other like coworkers actually means friends in a way, right? And that it would be like, well, you know, you're going to be out, I'm going to cover your shift or whatever, and that there isn't antagonistic or competitive interactions between people, right? And that inappropriate behavior would not be tolerated, right? Everyone may have different jobs, but no one has more power or worth over another or under another, and that we treat each other like people, right? And our abilities and our needs will shift and change over time, and that our organization and our systems actually are flexible enough to work with those things, as opposed to you're in or you're out. You know, you come in on time or you're fired, right?
Well, and I think in other countries, it is more like that. I mean, obviously, there's more sick time and there's more like maternity and paternity leave than there is in the US. But the other thing is, it's that thing we talked about in one of our very first episodes, where a narcissist will break your legs and then expect you to run a marathon, right?
Yeah.
In the US, I mean, I used to feel this way too. When I would be sick and think about calling off sick at work, I would be thinking, well, crap, like, my coworkers are going to have to pick up the slack. And then when I get back, I'm going to have to do like double the work for a week or two to catch up and all of that. And none of that is actually your fault as a worker. That's because your employer that you work for hasn't like built into the system that people get sick and that people are human. So they haven't hired enough people, right? They haven't created systems for what to do when some people are absent, under the assumption that like on a given day, some people are going to be absent, right? You know, whether it's sick days or vacation or whatever, like none of those are built into the system. The system is run so bare bones because all we're trying to do is make the most money as possible, right? Or you're looking at something like, I worked at a school, it's so defunded, right? That you don't have the ability to build that stuff in. So you end up feeling like it's your personal responsibility. Oh, my coworkers are going to have to take on more work if I call in sick. That's not your fault. That's the company's fault.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But again, we don't ever blame the narcissist in a narcissistic system. We blame ourselves. We all take the blame on ourselves.
Yeah. The blame is always shifted. And part of it is that, like, it's actually not like we haven't solved these problems. We just don't. Like, I remember being in like a working group, and they were like, you know what? We're going to make sure that every task, at least 3 people knows how to perform this task.
Yeah.
And so that means that if 1 or even 2 people who can do this are out, that means that the entire system doesn't break or is really having a problem. And so, like, if you look at it that way, that's just like how you could actually structure work. It's not some kind of thing that we have to make up in the moment. We actually know how to do these things. We just don't. We don't.
Yeah.
And that's part of, like, you know, with capitalism, the only goal is profit, right? And then it's like, who cares about what happens by any other metric? And it's also making money, not necessarily for the employees or the public or whatever. At this point, it's actually about the shareholders, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that sort of segues into what I was going to bring up next, which is that we all take on way too much personal responsibility as individuals for the really systemic failures, right? Mm-hmm. And so things like in our families, you know, that looked like, well, if you just would have planned better or tried harder, this wouldn't have happened, right? Like somehow you're blamed for something going wrong. In systems, it's things like, well, if you're poor, that must be because you made bad decisions, you know?
Right.
Like,
right. Yeah.
Not looking at the fact that the minimum wage in the US is nowhere near enough to live on, right? And so, you know, if you're in a position where you're taking jobs that are at or near the minimum wage, you need to be working way more than 40 hours a week to actually just afford your rent and your groceries and things like that. How is that an individual failure, right? If you get sick in the US, you know, like you can easily go 6 figures into debt, right? Even with insurance. How is that a personal failure and not a failure of the medical and insurance system, right?
Right.
You know, burnout is what we were just talking about, that you have a company that you're working for that is extracting too much from you. You know, that they have shitty boundaries, and they're starting to be laws now in parts of the world where you can't contact employees in the evenings and on the weekends. Like, we have to actually have laws for that because it's so bad, the boundaries that company has. It's expecting you to be on all the time, all that bullshit about, like, you know, we're a family, like, welcome to the team. Like, no, right? That is gaslighting. That is absolute gaslighting.
Well, they're not wrong. It's just a fucked up narcissistic family. In terms of like individual issues related to systemic problems, I was working at a continuation high school when I was getting my hours for my license. So the continuation high school was a smaller school where the kids who couldn't, quote unquote, handle regular high school were put, and that they had smaller classes. They worked at their own pace, right? But they also were sort of considered bad kids, right? Like, these are the fuck ups or whatever. And they were also removed from their community, right? So, like, you know, they didn't get to see their friends during the day from, quote unquote, regular high school, right? They had to go to this whole different school, which had a bad reputation. And every single kid I ever interacted with or heard about at this school was someone who, in the previous year or 2 years, had had a traumatic event occur and did not get the support that they needed, and so could not meet or maintain the expectations that were placed on them, and then were funneled into this situation. I was referred a kid who I heard nothing but terrible things about her. And it was her attendance was terrible and she was late and she behaved poorly in class and all this stuff. And then I finally found out that like she had a special needs sibling at home. And like, I think it was a single parent situation. So like the parent had like more than one job and whatever. And so this teenage girl was staying at home because she was parenting and taking care of a disabled sibling.
Yeah.
Right. And then, of course, after doing all this, you come to school and they're giving you shit about not being in class and like not getting your homework in on time. Yeah, you wouldn't behave well. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's horrifying in some way. And then part of that is that just builds on itself and builds on itself, oh, well, they didn't do well in school and,
Yeah. I think that, part of what you're getting at here is that we have all internalized this narcissistic viewpoint of seeing people as only what we observe, right? Which is what narcissists do. They don't see the complete person, right? So you were told by these other people, oh, this girl is, late and she's truant sometimes and she doesn't behave well because that's what they saw. But no one actually stops to think. In a narcissistic system, the narcissist never stops to think, well, what's going on for them? Do they have unmet needs? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do they have, because you're not allowed to have needs at all. So how could you possibly have unmet ones, right?
Right.
And that's absolutely true too. You're not allowed to have unmet needs in these systems, right? You're not allowed to have needs at all. You're not allowed to have areas where you need assistance or education or support, right?
Right.
You're either a functional object or you're not a functional object, right?
And the thing is that this is a setup, right? Because these things are part of the human condition. They don't change depending on what culture you're in or whatever. We all get sick.
Mm-hmm.
We all age and die. We all are born and need to be cared for as babies and children because we can't do it ourselves. This is actually what's part of life. And I'm not even talking about like emotional stuff or whatever. And to create a system that does not take into account those human things,
Yeah.
is outrageous, enraging, and absurd. And what it does is that it keeps the people who have taken the power in power.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there's no way to win. There is no way to win unless you've sort of been chosen, right?
Unless you were born on third base and claimed you hit a home run, right? Like
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So yes, it is, far easier to meet all of the expectations of the narcissistic system if you were already born with money, if you were already born with, white privilege, if you were already born with male privilege, if you were like all of these things make it easier to look more like the perfect golden child of all of these narcissistic systems. Again, sort of, this umbrella of patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, all of this, right? And, what the narcissist doesn't and the narcissistic systems don't take into account are these things that, like you said, like unconsciously people think white men are more trustworthy, right? It's such a loaded, like, game, right? That nobody can actually win, but some people start way closer to the finish line than others, and that's just absolute bullshit and something that is completely not acknowledged by the system. And in fact, if you bring it up, you're, told you're a whiner or a complainer or you're, blah, 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 right? So,
right.
Yeah.
Can I say like one thing, which is I think related to the next thing, but it's just sort of like a personal example, which is if you look at parental leave. Okay. So when I had my child, I think I took maybe 2 months off. No, 6 weeks. Now that is sort of this exceptional standard in the US, right? in the sense that many women don't get any leave at all, any maternity leave.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in other countries, people get a year, sometimes two.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to say physiologically what was going on for me. So at 6 weeks, my baby was sleeping 2 hours at a time and feeding every 2 to 3 hours. And that was in addition to physically recovering from labor, and having a child, also including having to deal with being pregnant for, 40 weeks. So to expect someone to come back to work, first of all, they're not going to do good work. I mean, it's like, let's do the math here. Like, what are we talking about? Like, how is the baby going to be taken care of?
Yeah.
Like, and again, like, it absolutely takes a village, but it's like, this is not negotiable.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
This is how things get normalized, right? Is, people start being like, oh, you've got 6 weeks. Wow, that's great. I only got 2, right? It starts to be sort of this, it's your fault if you don't make it work, right? I mean, that's really the crux of all of these narcissistic systems is if you don't succeed, if you don't overcome the things we just talked about, right? Like being born, a person of color or disabled or a woman, if you don't overcome that, that's your personal failing. You didn't try hard enough. If you're not able to make 6 weeks of maternity leave work, that's your fault. You should have planned better or gotten more family assistance or blah, 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 blah. Some of which may or may not be possible for people, right? So,
right.
That sort of leads into the next thing we're going to talk about is that narcissistic systems see people as objects, not whole humans. And we've sort of been alluding to this, the whole time. But, you're only allowed to have needs and be a human if it doesn't interfere with the system, right? Or if you're one of those people that has gotten to the point where they are considered respectable, right? Like, I guarantee you, the CEO of a tech company can take a month off, and people will be like, oh, well, they work so hard. They deserve it,
Right.
I guarantee you they are not working as hard as the person with 2, minimum wage jobs, 2 full-time minimum wage jobs, right?
How many calluses do they have? Right.
Yes. And so, workers are just units of labor, and we talk about the US school system. It was developed as a way to create good workers, right? And so inherent in the system is compliance, is following directions, is having a hierarchy with the teacher at the head of the classroom and the students not, right? All of these things are built into our work environments. They're built into our school environments. You are an object. As a woman, you are either desirable according to the male gaze or not, right? So you're either a good desired object or not, right? As a Black person, you're either like a good entertainer or a good, athlete or a good example of the Black person who succeeded, right? Or you're not, right? I mean, it's like, are you useful for propping up the system and proving that this is a good system or not, right?
Being the scapegoat is also required to prop up the system.
Because you need scapegoats, right?
Yes, because your humanity needs to be stripped because that justifies the stripping of all humanity.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Disabled people are only useful when it's stories of like overcoming your disability, right? Like when you're sort of looking for that inspirational story of someone, look at everything they achieved, after the hand they were dealt in life. But what about the disabled person who's just fed up and doesn't want to do anything anymore because it's all too fucking hard? Like, they're not worthwhile, right? So, your personhood, your worthiness is conditional on how well you're propping up the system. So you're either productive and you're a good worker bee, or you're good inspiration for the system because you're a story of someone who like worked hard enough or did whatever enough and now they're a famous person or they're a, disabled person who actually made it work or they're whatever, right? Like, And so you're either useful as propaganda or you're useful as a tool. And if you're not, you're just completely discarded. And none of that takes into account your own internal experience, whether you're happy or not, whether you feel fulfilled or not, whether you feel like this life is meaningful or not. That doesn't matter to these systems.
Yeah. And I do want to say that oftentimes the rhetoric and the facade says the exact opposite, right? So, God loves each and every one of you. Oh, but he's also a vengeful God that's going to punish you for, I don't know, eating meat on Fridays or something like that. You have to look beyond the lies of what are being told.
Or what success looks like, right? We're told that success looks like having the right job, having the right amount of money, having the right spouse, having the right house, having the right car, right? And none of that makes anyone happy, you know?
I was talking to Eric, this was a couple years ago, closer to my retirement, and I was sort of talking about, well, not my regrets, but just like criticism of my career. And I was like, well, I never reached this marker of success or whatever. He just looked at me and he said, it was never about that for you. Like that. I mean, that's something that you were told was a marker of success, but you had these other things that you cared about more. And you did well in those areas because that's really what it was about. Like you actually helped people, No, you didn't write a book and then go on a press tour and that's not what you wanted, but that the things that you cared about and what your focus was, you did do well in.
Well, and imagine in a narcissistic family, if you and I had grown up and we'd defined our own markers of success versus what our parents wanted. I mean, we would have been out. Do you know what I mean? I mean, we would have just been, we would have been there would have been no place for us in the family. We would have been outcast, right? And that's what happens in these systems too.
You know that you need to be close enough to the bonfire that you're not going to freeze to death.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. All right. We're going to pause there. There's more. In case you haven't dissociated enough, there's more.
I'm so mad right now.
We're skipping the crazy mom off just for time, but I was thinking it might be good to just take a moment and quickly do a tool that we had this week because I'm pretty mad now too, and it could be good to sort of switch to something that feels a little more
okay.
I don't know.
I have something and it's related.
Okay, great.
So it was something that you and I both talked about, or you talked to me about, and then which is anarchist calisthenics.
Oh yes.
Yeah, which is basically find ways in your day-to-day life to break the rules in a way that's not going to harm people. It's not going to harm anybody. But what it does is it teaches you to become more and more comfortable with independent action in spite of societal pressure or community pressure. It also helps with sort of critical thinking and getting to know your own mind and what's important to you. It's as important to challenge these very deep beliefs that we've been given that if we do something that is out of bounds, we will be punished. Yeah. And not just that, but that we deserve to be punished.
Yeah.
We are actually ultimately free beings.
Yeah.
So anyway,
so what did you do?
Well, let's see. I cut through a parking lot instead of going around. I took a packet of honey from a cafe without asking. I walked on the grass a little bit, even though there was a walkway. Yeah, I mean, it's silly, but I had 2 glasses of wine before I boarded a transatlantic flight that left at 9:40 in the morning.
They say that airport you is the true you. I've heard that.
Oh no, I'm horrified. I am horrified. So anyway.
Yeah, it's actually that originally came from an anti-fascist training that I was watching. So for no reason, not connected to current events at all, was I watching an anti-fascist training.
No, not at all. There's no bearing on our actual lives.
Right. I just happened to be watching it. But yeah, I love that. Anarchist calisthenics are fantastic. Let's see. I'm trying to think of something I did this week that was helpful. I checked in with a friend in a way that I don't usually. And so I felt a little self-conscious about it. I was asking a friend for advice about something that normally I would just do on my own. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask what they think, and I'm going to ask for their advice. And it was an area of my life that I'm really competent. And so I don't usually ask for help. I usually just do it.
You mean pretty much every area of life?
And now I'm dissociating. And it was really nice. I felt really awkward. I definitely had like a little bit of a vulnerability hangover afterwards because I'm just not used to asking for help in that area or asking for someone's opinion,
Right.
But it was good, I mean, the response, of course, was lovely and helpful. And so, I realized that speaking of like anarchist calisthenic, it's like vulnerability calisthenics, right? Like asking for help. Like
Oh, yeah.
I'm used to defining the areas where I'm not good at things and where I know I need to ask for help. And I already have this sort of internalized script of like, oh, I'm not good at this. And so I need help or blah, blah, blah. Right.
Yeah.
But I realized it's good to push myself and ask for help, even in things that I think that I'm capable at, because A, it's always good to get someone else's opinion. And B, the most important part, like, it's really important to be vulnerable and connect in as many ways as we can, and give people the opportunity to care for me because I'm so terrible at accepting care because of how I grew up.
I will say that you have taught me that. I have learned that from you. You have modeled and made it easier for me to be vulnerable with you and ask for help. So I'm really grateful for you about that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I've learned so much from you, Megan. Like, I just
don't know what to say. Stop before I completely dissociate.
It's too late. It's recorded.
God damn
you can't get away from it.
No take
It's
backsies.
Now in the universe. It's a bell that can't be unrung.
Well, thank you.
Well of you.
Oh, no. I don't know what to do with that. Anyway, all right. Well, I'm just going to awkwardly segue to saying goodbye to everyone.
You live with it.
If you want to get in touch with us and tell us that you like what we're doing and make us immediately dissociate, you can email us at h2bterrible@gmail.com. That's the letter H, the number 2, the letter B, terrible@gmail.com. We are on Instagram at terribledaughterpod. We're on YouTube. Are we still on TikTok? We had a conversation about whether we still wanted to be on TikTok with everything that's going down. For now, we're still on TikTok.
I think technically we're on TikTok, but I think we're taking a break from TikTok. Again, we don't want to be a tool.
We're trying to be disruptive to things that are evil and not just take advantage of them because they're there. And then we also have an Etsy store. You can search for us on Etsy by searching for Heinous Offspring, and you will find all of our former scapegoat and former golden child mugs and sweatshirts with the show design and all sorts of things. So if you want to signal to other terrible children in the wild that you are a terrible child, I recommend merch. And then, follow us on all of those channels and all of those things. That helps us too. And spread the word. If you know other terrible children, we'd love to have them in the tribe. So one of the things that I think we have as superpowers when we're fighting against these systems, well, there's two main things that we have. One, we can see them, right? I mean, I know terrible children are able to see how these systems we're talking about mirror their own childhoods and are able to see behind the curtain because narcissists, whether they're individuals or systems, are really good at making it look happy and shiny from the outside, right? But we can see behind the curtain. And so that's one thing we're good at. And the second thing is we have practice being the villain. We have practice being the one that says, you know what? I'm not going to do this. Or you know what? If you punish me for that, that's on you, right? We have practice doing this. So we just invite you to be the villain, disrupt, and be the anarchist.
Rebel, enjoy it.
And have a good time. Thank you for listening. We'd be so grateful if you'd follow or subscribe and rate and review our podcast on your favorite podcast app.
Make sure to share it with friends, family, or anyone that you think may benefit from this content.
And as a final reminder, you are not the crazy one.